She falls in love with the millionaire who saved her, but discovers he is one of the quadruplets. The scream escaped my throat before I could stop it. My fingers clung desperately to the edge of the terrace of the MacArthur Center, the most luxurious shopping center in Norfolk, Virginia. The cold October wind whipped my face as I tried to keep my precarious balance on the ledge wet from the rain that had just fallen. "Hold my hand," a firm male voice cut through the air. "Trust me." Through the tears that blurred my vision, I distinguished a tall man approaching cautiously. His impeccable Italian suit contrasted with the determined way he moved towards me, as if saving people on the brink of disaster was part of his daily routine. I just wanted to take a picture of the sunset," I stammered, feeling the cold metal under my fingers. My foot slipped and... "Madison, isn't it?" He read my employee badge from the mall bookstore. "I'm Adrian. I'll get you out of this, okay? I just need you to trust me for 30 seconds. His green eyes conveyed a calm that seemed absurd in that situation. The wind ruffled his dark brown hair, but his expression remained unwavering. He stretched out his hand towards me, taking another calculated step. "How did you get here so quickly?" I asked, trying to distract myself from the fear that was freezing my muscles. "I was at the penthouse, in a meeting." He smiled slightly. "Fate, perhaps?" At that moment, my fingers began to slip. A high-pitched scream escaped my lips as I felt my body tilt backwards. In one swift movement, Adrian lunged forward, his arms wrapping around me tightly. The world spun for a dizzying instant before I found myself pressed safely against his chest, both of us lying on the terrace floor. "Take a deep breath," he murmured, still holding me. "It's all over now." His perfume, a sophisticated blend of sandalwood and some essence I couldn't identify, filled my senses as I tried to control my erratic breathing. His arms were strong and warm, a welcome contrast to the cold that overwhelmed me. I don't know how to thank you," I finally managed to say, pulling away a little to look at him. "How about some coffee?" The words came naturally from his lips, accompanied by a smile that lit up his face in a way that made my heart skip a beat. After a scare like that, I think we both need a good dose of caffeine. Before I could reply, the terrace door opened violently. A man identical to Adrian burst into the space, followed by mall security guards. "Drew, I got the alert from the security system and..." He stopped abruptly, his eyes identical to Adrian's going wide when he saw us still sitting on the floor. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Austin," Adrian, or Drew, replied, getting up and helping me to do the same. "Actually, I was just about to ask Madison out for coffee." Austin frowned, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw a shadow of concern cross his face. "You have that video conference with Dubai in 15 minutes. Cancel it." Adrian turned to me, his green eyes shining with something that looked like amusement. "Unless you'd rather reschedule for another day." I looked from one to the other, still trying to process that there were two of them. Twins. The resemblance was striking, although Austin seemed more serious, more restrained. While Adrian exuded a relaxed confidence, his brother maintained a more rigid, businesslike posture. I hesitated, my mind still a jumble of adrenaline and surprise. "I think I owe at least one coffee to the man who saved my life." "Excellent choice," Adrian smiled, and this time, the gesture reached his eyes, creating little wrinkles at the corners that made him even more attractive. "I know a perfect place on the 3rd floor." As Adrian guided me toward the door, I could feel Austin's intense gaze following us. There was something in his expression that I couldn't decipher. Concern, disapproval. But before I could analyze further, Adrian started telling me about how that terrace was his favorite place to think. What I didn't know, as we walked down to the cafe, was that that moment on the terrace wasn't just the beginning of a dramatic rescue story. It was the first chapter of something much more complex, a web of identities and emotions that I could never have imagined. Because Adrian and Austin weren't just twins, they were part of an identical quartet that was about to turn my life upside down. Lighthouse Coffee, on the 3rd floor of the MacArthur Center, was unlike any coffee shop I had ever been to. With its floor-to-ceiling glass walls and panoramic view of the Elizabeth River, The place looked more like a modern art gallery than a coffee shop. Adrian guided me to a discreet table in the corner, where hanging plants created a sense of privacy. "So, Madison," he began, after we'd placed our orders, "apart from risking your life for sunset photos, what else do you do?" I adjusted myself in the blue velvet chair, still feeling slightly disconcerted by the intensity of his gaze. "I've been working at Noble Pages for 2 years, ever since I graduated from ODU with a degree in literature. It wasn't exactly the plan to be a bookseller forever, but..." I shrugged, trying not to sound too self-conscious. "But books are a passion," he added, leaning forward slightly. The movement caused the late afternoon light to create interesting shadows on his perfectly sculpted face. "They're more than that. They're..." I stopped when I noticed his expression change subtly, his eyes focusing on something behind me. "Drew!" A voice identical to his sounded nearby. "I thought I'd find you here." I turned to find another man who could be Adrian's perfect clone. Or was it Drew? Approaching our table. Unlike the formal suit Adrian wore, this one was dressed in dark jeans and a black polo shirt that highlighted his broad shoulders. His smile was more relaxed, almost mischievous. "Alex," Adrian replied, and there was a note of resignation in his voice. "I thought you were in San Francisco." "I got back early. The startup project can wait, apart from Grandma Charlotte's birthday this weekend." Alex pulled up a chair and sat down unceremoniously. His green eyes, identical to his brother's, rested on me with genuine interest. "And who is this lovely company?" "Madison," I replied, trying not to show my growing amazement. Your brother saved me from a near fall today." "Ah, so you're the girl from the terrace," Alex exclaimed, his face lighting up with understanding. "Austin texted me about it. He said Drew was playing the hero again." "Drew?" I looked confusedly at the man who had saved me. "I thought your name was Adrian." An awkward silence fell over the table. Alex covered his mouth, trying to disguise a laugh, while the man in front of me closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering patience. "Actually," he began, casting a warning glance at Alex, "Adrian is my middle name. The family call me Drew, but professionally, I go by Adrian. And you should have warned me that you canceled the video conference with Dubai." A new voice joined the conversation. Austin, the brother I had met on the terrace, approached the table with determined steps. I had to improvise an explanation for the investors. I watched in amazement as a third identical brother joined our ever-growing group. The only difference between them was their style. Austin in his meticulously tailored navy suit, Alex in his casual chic production, and Adrian Drew in their more modern Italian suit. "Madison," Austin nodded briefly in my direction. "I see my brother is keeping you entertained." There was something about the way he said the last word that made me shudder slightly. His eyes, although identical to the others, carried a different weight, a seriousness that contrasted with Alex's amused glint and Adrian's warm intensity. "Actually," Adrian stood up gently, "Madison and I were having a private conversation about literature." "Literature?" An enigmatic smile appeared on Austin's lips. "Interesting, considering that our other brother, Andrew, is a writer." My heart stopped for a moment. "Another brother?" "Yes," Alex replied, leaning back in his chair with a smile that seemed to hide 1,000 secrets. "We're quadruplets. Andrew is the recluse of the family. He lives in a house by the sea in Virginia Beach, lost among his manuscripts and editorial deadlines." I looked at each of them, trying to process the information. Quadruplets. 4 absolutely identical men, each with their own life, their own personality. And I wasn't even sure which of them had actually saved me on the terrace. "I think I need something stronger than coffee," I muttered, causing Alex to let out a genuine laugh. "Welcome to the club," he winked. "Imagine how our girlfriends feel." Alex's casual comment made my stomach turn. Girlfriends. Of course, men like that, rich, attractive, successful, wouldn't be single. The cup of coffee in my hand suddenly looked very interesting. "Alex," Adrian, or Drew, said in a warning tone, but was interrupted by the insistent ringing of Austin's cell phone. Emergency meeting at the office, Austin announced, checking the message. Drew, we need you too. Adrian nodded, standing up with natural elegance. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, it looked like he wanted to say something more. Instead, he took a card from his inside jacket pocket and slid it across the table towards me. In case you want to continue our conversation about literature, he said softly, or need to be rescued again. I watched the three brothers walk away, each with their own style of walking, their own subtly different manners. The card in my hands bore only a phone number and the initials ADR. It was only then that I realized I still didn't know which of them had actually saved me on the terrace. 3 days had passed since the incident on the terrace, and the card with the initials AD, Charsos, was still haunting me, tucked between the pages of my worn-out copy of Pride and Prejudice. The irony of my own novel-worthy situation didn't escape me, an ordinary girl caught up in a mystery with 4 identical men. It was during my shift at Noble Pages that fate decided to complicate things even further. I was organizing the new releases section when a familiar voice made me freeze. So this is where you hide out between adventures on the terrace. I turned to find one of the Quadruplets, wearing faded jeans and a gray cashmere sweater that looked absurdly casual and yet elegant. There was something different about his smile, softer, more contemplative. Andrew? I ventured, remembering that he was the writer. He laughed, a low, melodious sound. No, Alex. But it's flattering that you're already trying to tell us apart. I felt my face heat up. Sorry. It's just that, well, they mentioned that Andrew is a writer, and you seem more intellectual today, he added, picking up a book from the shelf. I decided to do some market research. I have a technology startup focused on digital publishing, and it's always good to understand the traditional side of the business. He moved closer, his scent different from what I remembered from the man on the terrace, fresher, with citrus notes. Actually, Madison, I came here for another reason. Drew won't stop talking about you. Drew, my heart raced. So he's the one who saved me. Alex tilted his head, an amused glint in his eyes. Isn't that the story you know? Before I could answer, my cell phone vibrated with a message. It was from an unknown number. Dinner tonight. There's a special place I want to show you. Hey. Looks like someone had the same idea as me, Alex commented, clearly having seen the message. His smile now had a hint of concern. Just a word of advice, Madison. Make sure you know which one of us you're going out with. What do you mean? Let's just say it wouldn't be the first time someone got confused. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that reminded me strangely of Adrian. Or was it Drew? We're identical quadruplets living in the same city. The possibilities for confusion are interesting. Are you trying to warn me about something specific? Alex seemed to consider the question for a moment. Just be cautious, especially with Austin. He may seem the most serious, but... He stopped abruptly, as if he'd said too much. At that moment, a customer approached asking for help, and by the time I turned around, Alex had disappeared between the shelves. I stared at the message on my cell phone, a strange feeling settling in my stomach. I decided to accept the invitation. At 8 o'clock sharp, I entered Saltine, an elegant restaurant in a refurbished former bank in the historic center of Norfolk. The maitre d' led me to a table where one of the brothers was waiting for me, looking impeccable in a navy blue blazer. You look lovely, he said, getting up to pull out my chair. It was the same perfume as on the terrace, sandalwood. My heart raced. Thank you. Drew, I tried, watching his reaction. He smiled, that smile that made his eyes sparkle. Adrian, actually, Drew is more like family. Confusion must have shown on my face, because he continued, I know it must be confusing. 4 identical faces, 4 different names. Sometimes even we get lost. Alex was in the bookshop today, I commented, studying his reaction. He seemed worried. A shadow passed across Adrian's face. Alex has always been the most protective, especially after what happened to the last girl who got involved with one of us. What happened? Adrian opened his mouth to reply, but was interrupted by the arrival of the sommelier. While he was discussing wines, I noticed a detail on his wrist, a small scar next to his watch. I was sure I hadn't seen that on the man on the terrace. Dinner went like a dream. Adrian was charming, intelligent, and had a way of making me feel as if we were the only people in the restaurant. We talked about books, about my dreams of writing, about the unique dynamic of growing up as part of Quadruplets. It wasn't until we were enjoying dessert that he asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why didn't you call the number on the card?" I froze with the spoonful of crème brûlée halfway to my mouth. "But you texted me today." Adrian frowned. "What message?" I took out my cell phone and showed him the message I'd received earlier. His face changed, an expression I couldn't decipher taking over his features. "Madison," he said slowly. "I didn't send that message, and that's not my number." The crème brûlée suddenly lost all flavor. If it wasn't Adrian who sent the message, which of the brothers was playing this game? And more importantly, who had really saved me on that terrace? "I think we need to talk about my brothers," Adrian finally said, his voice serious. "There are things you need to know." At the same moment, my cell phone vibrated with another message from the mysterious number. "Don't believe everything he says. A." Adrian's revelation about the mystery message turned our dessert into a veiled interrogation. However, before he could elaborate on what I needed to know about his brothers, his cell phone rang with an urgency that seemed rehearsed. "I'm sorry," he said, his face tense as he read the message. "Company emergency. I promise we'll continue this conversation." I watched him pay the bill and leave hastily, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. The waiter approached to clear the plates, and it was then that I noticed a folded napkin under Adrian's plate. On it, in elegant handwriting, "Virginia Beach Pier, tomorrow, 7 a.m. Andrew." Andrew, the writer brother, the recluse I hadn't met yet. The next morning, against all common sense, I drove to Virginia Beach. The pier was practically deserted at that time, except for a few early rising fishermen. The rising sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, creating an almost unreal atmosphere. "You came." The familiar yet different voice came from behind me. I turned to find another identical face, this time framed by reading glasses and slightly longer hair than the other brothers. "Andrew?" He smiled, a smile that seemed to carry 1,000 untold stories. Himself, the brother who preferred words to numbers. We walked to the end of the pier in silence. Andrew was wearing a beige cardigan over a white t-shirt, looking more like a university professor than a tech millionaire. "Why did you call me here?" "Because you deserve to know the truth," he replied, looking at the horizon. "About that day on the terrace, about who really saved you." My heart raced. "Was it you?" Andrew laughed softly. "No. I rarely leave my house in Virginia Beach, but I know exactly what happened, because I'm the only one who keeps in real contact with all of them." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "Did you realize that each of them has a different version of the story?" I nodded slowly, remembering the inconsistencies in the conversations. "Madison, do you know the story of the prince and the beggar? Imagine 4 princes who occasionally swap places. Since we were children, we've developed a game, a way of living each other's lives when life itself becomes suffocating." "Are you saying that you pass each other off?" "Austin runs the technology company. Alex manages startups. Drew, or Adrian as he prefers to be called now, handles international investments. I write, but sometimes," he paused significantly, "sometimes Austin wants to be Drew. Drew wants to be Alex, and Alex has always wanted to be all of us." A shiver ran down my spine. "What about the day on the terrace? The man who saved you was using the wrong name that day." Andrew pulled something out of his pocket, an old photo. In it, 4 identical boys were smiling at the camera, each wearing a different colored bracelet. This was our way of identifying ourselves as children. Blue for Austin, green for Alex, red for Drew, purple for me. I suddenly remembered the scar on Adrian's wrist during dinner, exactly where one of those bracelets would be. But why tell me this? Because the last time one of us really fell in love, The game went too far. Andrew put the photo away. Sophia was an assistant editor at my publishing house. She met Drew at a literary event, or thought she had met Drew. In fact, it was Austin impersonating him. When the truth came out, what happened to her? She disappeared. She moved to another state, changed jobs, deleted all her social networks. The trauma of finding out she'd been dating the wrong person for months was too much. I felt my stomach turn. Why are you telling me all this? Because I've seen how Drew, the real Drew, looks at you. And because I got it last night. He showed me a message on his cell phone. She's different, Andrew. Don't let it happen again. A. Which one sent it? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. That's the problem with our little game. Andrew smiled sadly. Sometimes we don't even know who's who anymore. At that moment, I noticed movement at the start of the pier. A familiar figure was walking towards us, his impeccable suit standing out against the casual backdrop of the beach. Ah, Andrew sighed. Looks like Austin found out about our little rendezvous. How did he... Track her in my car, Andrew explained casually. He's always been the most controlling of us. Austin approached with determined strides, his face a mask of restrained irritation. But there was something different about his gait, something that reminded me more of... Madison, Andrew said quickly, before his brother reached us. Remember, not everything is what it seems. Look at the details, the way she walks, the gestures, the little scars. The truth is in the details. When Austin reached us, his gaze roamed between Andrew and me with a familiar intensity. I thought we agreed not to involve you in this, brother. Andrew smiled enigmatically. No, you agreed. I just watched, as I always do. The sun was now completely high in the sky, illuminating the three of us on the pier, me, the reclusive writer, and the man who may or may not actually be Austin. Somewhere, the other two brothers probably already knew about this encounter. And I was beginning to realize that falling in love with one of them meant somehow getting involved with all of them. The confrontation on the pier ended as abruptly as it began. Austin practically dragged Andrew away, leaving me alone with my doubts and a single certainty. I needed concrete answers. I drove back to Norfolk on autopilot, my mind going over every interaction with the brothers, the colored bracelets, the slight differences in the way they walked, the scars. It was like trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle where all the pieces were the same shape. It was then that I remembered. Noble Pages kept a digital archive of all the literary events of the last 5 years. If Andrew really was a published writer, and if the story about Sophia was true, I spent my afternoon off delving into the bookstore's archives. It was in the 2023 folder that I found it. A photo from a launch event. Sophia Chen, a stunning Asian woman in a red dress, was smiling next to one of the quadruplets. The caption read, Editor-in-Chief Austin Richardson with Assistant Editor Sophia Chen. Austin, not Drew. Looking for something specific? I nearly fell off my chair. Alex, or someone who looked like Alex, in his typical casual chic outfit, was leaning against the office doorframe. How did you get in here? This is a restricted area. I have my methods. He came closer, looking at the photo on my computer. His expression changed subtly. Ah, you met Andrew today. How? Austin called me, or rather, Drew impersonating Austin called me. He sat on the edge of the table, too close for my comfort. Confusing, isn't it? Sometimes I wonder how we got to this point. I studied his face, looking for clues. The scent was the same as the one I smelled in the bookstore a few days ago, citrus. But there was something different in his eyes today. Why do you do this? I finally asked. Why switch identities? He considered the question for a moment. Have you ever wondered what it's like to grow up being a quarter of a person? Always compared, always measured against 3 identical versions of yourself. He picked up a paperclip from the table, absent-mindedly playing with it, a gesture that reminded me more of Adrian than Alex. The game started out as child's play, a way of finding out who we were as individuals. But then we realized that being someone else is sometimes easier than being yourself. He put the clips back, perfectly aligned with the others, a gesture too meticulous for the Alex I knew. Austin was in love with Sophia, but she only had eyes for Drew. So, he impersonated Drew to win her over, I added, the pieces falling into place. And it worked. For a while. He stood up, walking over to the window. Until Drew found out and decided to confront Sophia as Austin. The problem was that she was already in love with the version of Drew that Austin had created. And where were you during all this? He turned around, a sad smile playing on his lips. Who says I'm Alex? My heart stopped for a second. Drew. Yes, today. Drew, ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen before. After Sophia found out the truth, she tried to, well, let's just say that the roof of the MacArthur Center wasn't her first choice for a sunset photo. The realization hit me like a punch. The rooftop. You saved me because I saw the signs. The same lost look, the same search for the perfect angle for one last photo. He moved closer, his intense green eyes fixed on mine. I couldn't let it happen again. So it was you, the real you. Yes, and no. He smiled humorlessly. I was passing through Austin that day, business meeting at the penthouse, but when I saw you on the ledge, he stopped, as if the words were too difficult. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm tired of lying. Because when I saw you today on the pier with Andrew, I realized it was happening again, all of us somehow getting involved with the same woman. He took a step towards me. And because, for the first time since Sophia, I want someone to meet the real Drew. At that moment, my cell phone vibrated with 2 simultaneous messages. Don't trust him. He's not who he says he is. A. Dinner tonight, same place, same time. We need to talk. Drew. I looked at the man in front of me, who was also looking at his own cell phone with a confused expression. I didn't send that message, he said, showing me a third message on his cell phone. Game over, brother. Time to tell you the truth about the terrace. Austin. Somewhere in Norfolk, 3 other men with the same face were moving their pieces in a game I still didn't fully understand. And now, looking at Drew, if it really was him, I realized that I was hopelessly involved in their masked dance. The question was I ready to find out who was really behind each of them? I accepted the invitation to dinner, not the one from the mysterious message, but the one from the man in front of me, the one who claimed to be Drew. We agreed to meet at the Chrysler Museum Glass Studio, an unusual place for dinner, but one that he assured me would make sense. I had 3 hours until the meeting, enough time to do something I should have done from the start. Research the Richardsons. Norfolk's public library held all the digitized local newspapers from the last 30 years. It was in the social pages of 1996 that I found the first clue, birth of Richardson heirs, first case of identical quadruplets in Norfolk. The photo showed 4 absolutely identical babies, each with a colored bracelet on their wrist. But it was the caption that made me stop. Pictured, Alexander Drew Richardson, Austin Dean Richardson, Adrian Douglas Richardson, and Andrew David Richardson. Alexander Drew, not Drew Alexander. My hands were shaking as I continued my research. I found more photos of the boys growing up, graduations, social events, company openings. In all of them, they kept their colorful bracelets on. Until 2019, when public photos started to become rare. At 8 o'clock sharp, I parked in front of the glass studio. The building seemed deserted, except for a soft light coming from inside. When I entered, I found the space transformed. Work tables had been moved aside to make way for a single elegantly set table, surrounded by glass sculptures that reflected the light in a mesmerizing way. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice came from behind one of the larger sculptures. The way glass can be molded into so many different shapes, but its essence remains the same. Drew, or whoever he was, emerged from the shadows, wearing a black sweater that made him look even more elegant. But there was something different about his movements today. Alexander Drew Richardson, I said, watching his reaction. That's your real name. He paused, an enigmatic smile playing on his lips. you've been doing your homework. Why the lie about names? Why all the confusion? Sit down, he indicated the table. It's time you knew the truth. All of it. As he poured us wine, he began to speak. We grew up as an attraction. The Richardson Quadruplets. Everyone wanted to label us, categorize us. Austin was the responsible one, Alex the rebel, Andrew the intellectual, and me. Well, I was the chameleon, which could be any one of them. Drew. Alex, he corrected softly. Today, I'm Alex. The real Alex, the one you met in the bookstore the other day. It was Drew impersonating me, just like Austin was impersonating Drew on the terrace. My head spun. So who really saved me? Austin. It was always Austin. Alex, the real Alex, took a sip of wine. He saw you on the terrace and acted on instinct. But when he saw how you looked at him, he decided to be Drew. Because Drew has always been the romantic of the family. What about dinner at the Saltine? That was the real Drew, trying to fix the mess Austin had created. He laughed humorlessly. The problem is that Austin really did fall in love with you, just like Drew. And He stopped, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made me hold my breath. And you? Before he could answer, the studio lights flickered on. A figure emerged from the back door, another identical face, but with an expression I'd never seen before. No more lies, Alex. The voice was firm, controlled. Austin. She deserves to know everything. Austin. Alex stood up, tension visible in his shoulders. No. Austin approached the table. You're not going to do to her what we did to Sophia. Not this time. What's going on? I demanded, getting up too. It turns out, Madison, that my brother here forgot to mention the most important part of the story. Austin never took his eyes off Alex. Sophia didn't try to kill herself because she found out about our identity game. She tried to kill herself because she found out she was pregnant. The silence that followed was deafening. Alex closed his eyes, as if he had been punched. And the worst thing, Austin continued, is that to this day she doesn't know who the father really is. At that moment, 2 more sets of footsteps echoed through the studio. Drew and Andrew emerged from the shadows, completing the quartet for the first time since this whole story began. I think, Andrew said softly, that it's time we all told our side of the story. The 4 identical brothers formed a circle around me, each carrying their own version of the truth, their own guilt and secrets. And I, in the center of that circle, finally understood what Sophia must have felt. It was like being trapped in a kaleidoscope, where each turn revealed a new facet of the same image, beautiful, complex, and potentially destructive. The Chrysler Museum Glass Studio, with its kaleidoscopic light-reflecting sculptures, seemed the perfect setting for this confrontation. 5 chairs were arranged in a circle, me and the 4 identical men who had turned my life upside down. Start, Austin, Andrew said, adjusting his glasses. You've always been first in everything. Austin unbuttoned his jacket before sitting down, a gesture I now recognized as characteristic of him. I met Sophia at a literary event. She was brilliant, determined, and completely in love with the image she had of Drew. An image you helped create, Drew interrupted, his voice laced with bitterness. Yes. Austin didn't look away. I impersonated Drew because for the first time in my life, I wanted to be more than the responsible brother, the administrator, the controller. My turn, Drew leaned forward. I discovered their romance by chance. I saw messages on Austin's cell phone, love messages signed with my name. At first, I thought I'd expose everything, but then... So you decided to impersonate me to confront her, Austin added, and you ended up falling in love too. Drew wiped his hands across his face, looking suddenly exhausted. She was different with each version of us. With Drew, or Austin impersonating Drew, she was sweet, romantic. With me, thinking I was Austin, she was defiant, intellectual. And with me, Alex broke into the conversation, she was wild, free. He smiled humorlessly. Of course, she thought I was Drew too. Didn't anyone ask why I isolated myself in Virginia Beach? Andrew finally said. All eyes turned to him. I was the only one who never took part in the game with Sophia, but I was the one she turned to when she found out she was pregnant. My heart raced. Why you? Because I was the only one she'd never kissed. The only one she really trusted. Andrew took off his glasses, rubbing his eyes. She came to me crying, saying she was carrying a child that could have been any of my brothers, except mine. What happened to the baby? The question escaped before I could stop it. A heavy silence fell over the group. It was Austin who finally answered. She lost the baby the same night she tried to... that she went to the terrace. His voice faltered slightly. The stress, the confusion, the guilt, it was too much. That's why you saved me that day, I murmured, the pieces finally falling into place. Yes and no. Austin stood up, walking over to one of the glass sculptures. I saved you because it was the right thing to do. I passed myself off as Drew afterwards because I wanted a second chance. A chance to do things right this time. But then Drew found out, Alex continued, and decided to take your place. And you decided to warn me, posing as Alex, Drew added, while the real Alex was in San Francisco. I looked at each of them, trying to process all the layers of deception and truth. Where is Sophia now? London, Andrew replied. Working as editor-in-chief for a big publishing house. She's fine, finally. And you? I asked, looking at each of them. Are you all right? A bitter laugh echoed through the studio. It was impossible to tell who it came from first. We're stuck, Drew finally said. Stuck in this identity game we've created for ourselves, until you came along. Me? You were the first person who really tried to see us as individuals, Austin explained. Who noticed our differences, not just our similarities. And the first one who made us want to be honest, Alex added. Andrew stood up, walking over to the table where dinner was cooling, oblivious. You know what the irony is? We started this game of switching identities because we wanted to find out who we were as individuals, and we ended up more lost than ever. Until now, Drew said, his eyes meeting mine. Madison, But before he could continue, the studio door opened. A female figure entered, her high heels echoing in the sudden silence. Sorry to interrupt your family therapy session, she said, her soft voice carrying a slight British accent. But I think it's about time you knew the truth. All of it. Sophia Chen looked even more beautiful than in the photo from the literary event, her simple black dress contrasting with the determination in her eyes. Sophia, the four brothers spoke in unison, and at that moment, for the first time, they looked truly identical, united by shock and the weight of the past that had just come through the door. The air in the glass studio became thick with Sophia's presence. She walked to the center of our circle, her eyes scanning each identical face before landing on me. Madison, isn't it? She smiled softly. Andrew told me about you. About all of you, actually. Aren't you supposed to be in London? Austin asked, his voice betraying an emotion he was trying to control. I came back 6 months ago. Sophia tucked a lock of her black hair behind her ear. Actually, I never went to London. That was just another story Andrew made up to protect us all. Andrew lowered his head, a sad smile playing on his lips. I'm sorry, brothers, but she needed time. Time for what? Drew asked, his voice almost a whisper. In response, Sophia opened her bag and took out an envelope. Inside was a photo, a little girl of about 3, with Asian features and familiar green eyes. To raise our daughter, she said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. The four brothers stared at the photograph, each processing the weight of that revelation. Her name is Charlotte, Sophia continued. Like your grandmother. And before you ask, yes, I know who the father is. How? Alex asked, his voice hoarse. We didn't know ourselves when... DNA doesn't lie, she interrupted softly. And more importantly, neither does the heart. Sophia walked over to Austin, handing him the photograph. She has her methodical way of organizing toys, her mania for lining everything up perfectly. Her eyes filled with tears. And your heart, Austin. It's always been you. Austin held the photo with trembling hands, his eyes fixed on the little girl who was undeniably his daughter. Why go back now? Drew asked, his voice laden with restrained emotion. Because I heard you were doing it again, Sophia replied, looking at me. The identity game, the confusion. Madison doesn't deserve to go through what I went through. It's not the same, Austin protested. No. Sophia raised an eyebrow. You saved her on the terrace and impersonated Drew, just like you did with me at the beginning. She turned to me. The difference is that this time, he actually fell in love with you by being himself, not by pretending to be someone else. I looked at Austin, realizing for the first time that all the signs had always pointed to him. The way he saved me, the genuine concern, even the confusion over names. He was trying to be honest in the only way he knew how. All this time, I mumbled. I wanted to tell you. Austin took a step towards me. But every time I tried, the fear of repeating the past. The fear that she'd prefer the version of you she thought was Drew, Sophia added softly. Austin, didn't you ever realize that it was you, the real you, that I fell in love with first? Alex let out a surprised laugh. All this time thinking she'd fallen for Drew's charm. The charm was yours, Sophia smiled. But the heart was always Austin's. Andrew stood up, straightening his glasses. I think it's time we put an end to this game, once and for all. One by one, the brothers began to take something off their wrists, thin leather bracelets, each in its original color. Blue, green, red, and purple fell onto the glass table. We don't need these anymore, Drew said. We don't need to be other people to be loved. Charlotte wants to meet her aunt and uncle, Sophia announced softly. The real uncles, not their versions. Austin was still holding the photo of his daughter when he turned to me. Madison, You're you, I interrupted, taking a step towards him. The man from the terrace, the man I fell in love with, no matter what name he was using. He smiled, that smile that I now recognized as uniquely his. I think I owe you dinner, like Austin this time. Actually, Andrew interjected, I think we all owe Madison dinner, separately, by being ourselves. Starting with me, Alex joked, the real bad boy of the family. Then me, Drew smiled, the incorrigible romantic. And me, Andrew added, the storyteller. Sophia watched the scene with a satisfied smile. See, it's not that hard to be yourselves. I looked at the four brothers, no longer a jumbled puzzle, but four distinct men, each with their own personality, their own dreams and fears. And in the center of it all, Austin looked at me as if he could finally breathe after years of holding his breath. So, he said softly, ready to meet the real Austin Richardson? I smiled, taking his hand. I can't wait. The glass sculptures around us reflected the light differently now, no longer a confusing kaleidoscope, but a clear prism, separating each color into its own unique and beautiful spectrum. And somewhere in Norfolk, a little green-eyed girl was waiting to meet not just her father, but a whole family who had finally learned to be truly themselves.